Rakkety Tam, Chapter 19, with the big Wolverine. Flames from the vermin campfire illumined the face of Golo the Savage, giving him a malevolent look. The Wolverine's eyes glittered like twin stars of evil omen in his brutish head as he sat upon the drum in the gathering twilight. Gulo's mood had not improved. His scouts had once again lost the trail which he was convinced belonged to his brother. Foxes and ermine crowded about the fireside of the blaze, anxious to maintain distance from their cruel chieftain. Laying huddled about midpoint between the vermin and Gulo were Runny Eye and Blood Snout. Gaunt, exhausted, and terrified witless, the two river rats had been roped tight by their necks to a stake. An ermine guard approached Gulo cautiously. Lord Captain Shard has returned with his scouts. He brings captives. The White Fox marched into the head of this contingent. He was wearing Martin's sword as Amro had worn it down the back of his cloak, tied to his shoulder, standing partially out of the firelight. Shard bowed swiftly to the Wolverine. Mighty One, I have taken prisoners 2 creatures from Redwall Place. Knowing thy wisdom, I brought them straight to thee. These 2 should be good knowledge of their fortress and strengths and weakness. Had Gulo captured the Redwallers, he would have slain them first, leaving it too late for questions later. He knew Shard was merely flattering him, but the White Fox was his best and most intelligent captain. You did well, Shard. Where are these 2? Armel and Berkeley were thrust forward. Both caught their breath in the barbaric sight of the Wolverine. Armel shuddered as the beast's eyes roved over them both. Gulu's paw banged down on the drum, startling them. It was hard not to show fear in the presence of such a monster. The Wolverine glared at them from beneath hooded eyelids, wherefore he began his interrogation. My captain tells me you both are from Redwall. 'Tis true? Amor whispered bravely to her otter friend. Tell him nothing. Gulu acted as if he had not heard the remark. So, a river dog and a tree mouse, eh? Tell me thy names. Though Brookie was trembling, she shouted at Gulu, We will tell you nothing. Gulu smiled. A chill ran through the otter maid at the sight of his bared fangs. Rising from the drum, Gulu walked a slow circle round the 2 abbey maids. I like to see courage in a beast. 'Tis admirable but foolish. At dawn you will tell me all I want to know. How many creatures dwell within Redwall? The warriors who could resist me and my fighters? We would be easiest entrance to your fortress be for us. Amel echoed her friend's words. We will tell you nothing. The Wolverine returned to the drum, piercing on its edge. Now was the time to put into action the strategy he had learned from Shard when he had dealt with Drifttail's gang. He held up a paw, as it forbidden either of them to speak further. I do not want you to tell me anything right now, but at dawn I will come and speak to you again. Then you will gladly tell me all. Why? Because I'm Gulu the Savage, the lands of ice and snow beyond the great sea. Heed me now. Amril and Berkeley watched the trepidation as Gulu gave orders to some of his ermine. Bring the rats hither. Run-Eye and Blood Snout had loosened from their stakes and dragged to Gulu's presence, both stricken dumb with fear. The Wolverine cast his glance at Abbey Maid's direction. Look at these rats. See how frightened they are. They are not brave like thee because they know what I can do. Gulu and his warriors eat their enemies. Any beast who offends Gulu is his enemy. Take them from my sight. The 2 river rats were flung into the massive vermin on the other side of the fire. They only had time for a single despairing scream before the beast of Gulu fell upon the mass. Gulu turned his captives and shrugged. Ye have all of tonight to think of answers to my questions. Shard, guard them closely until the dawn. Just beyond the firelight, Armor and Brookie were bound to the broad ancient trunk of a 2-topped oak. Both had been stunned into horrific silence at what they had witnessed. Some time before Amel whispered to her friend, I can't believe this is happening to us. The otter maid strained against her bonds, but they were too scarce securely tied. If only my Uncle Skip knew that a fix were in, he'd do something to help us. Oh, I'm sorry, pal, I'm not being very helpful, am I? The tear fell from Irma's eye as she could do nothing to stop from running down her face. Just keep talking, Bricky. The sound of your voice comforts me. At least we're together. Two Ermen had been left to guard the prisoners. One of them kicked at Irma's football from where he lay. Silence! Save thy talking till dawn. The other Ermine snickered wickedly. I'm hoping you won't talk at all. Methinks Streamdog to the tree mouse won't be stringy as the river rat. Armel kicked back at him. He was out of range. Rotten scum, dirty coward. Brookie struggled with her bonds. Aye, why don't you untie me yourself, what? You see who'd get eaten then? The ermine rose, licking a blade of his shickle toward as he confronted the automaid, taunting her. Hee hee hee. But I ain't about to untie thee, so what do you do now, Streamdog, eh? Eh? Shard, who had been seated close to the fire, crept up and dealt the ermine a sound smack over the ears. Thou art here to guard these prisoners, not to badgy gossip with them. Cease thy prattling. The ermine stood to rigid attention until Shard went back to his seat by the fire. Then he slumped down on the ground alongside the other sentry and fell silent. Tam and Doogie lay in the bushes, a short distance from the sentries who stood guard at the camp edges. They had circled the area until both were behind the fire, facing the backs of Gulu and Shard. Tam pointed at his dirk, whispering, "The big old oak, this where they've got the maids tied. Do you see it, Doogie?" His friend moved to position slightly before responding. "I see it right enough. That's one of the lassies' cloaks sticking out from the ropes. They're bound to the other side of the tree, Tam. What's the plan?" The border warrior studied the way of the land for a while. "First, we'll have to let them settle down. There's vermin still moving about, but when the burn's down lower, that's when we'll move. If we could make it up into that hornburn yonder, we could jump into the upper branches of the oak where they're tied. Just one problem, that sentry." Doogie peered at the back of the perimeter sentry, and Ermine leaning against the hornbeam trunk, who was armed as a spear. The Highlander shrugged carelessly. "Oh, sure, that goes no problem, mate. We'll deal with him whilst we're laying here, waiting." Tam watched the doggy slip off quietly and circle in on the sentry. He heard the vermin give a soft grunt and then saw him lean back against the hornbeak trunk. A moment later, Doogie was back, cleaning the blade of his small dagger on the grass. He murmured, "I've propped him up on his spear. Won't be complaining about getting a good long sleep." Armel could tell by the slump of the Shard's back that he had fallen asleep by the fire, which now was only white ash and glowing embers. The Gulu was sleeping further away from her. She could see him stretched out on the ground with his back to the heat. Both ermine sentries were also deep in slumber, one curled up almost nose to tail, the other flat on his back, snoring throatily. The squirrel maid tried for the fourth time to reach the ropes with her teeth, but all she got was a straining pain in her neck. She sighed. "If I could only get my teeth into these ropes. How are you doing, Brookie?" The otter maid gritted quietly. "I've rubbed my paws raw trying to get 'em free. That Shard creature certainly ties a tight knot. He knows the ropes all right, Armel. Did you hear about that? Knows the ropes. I actually made a joke, but it doesn't seem very funny right now." "Shh, don't make a sound, either of you." Brookie whispered it to her companion. "Did you say something?" The voice sounded again. "No, it was me, Mom. Look up, but don't say anything. We're friends." Gonzing Apur, the Abbey maids found themselves staring into the face of Tam and Doogie. The Highlander smiled. "Now hold ye wilts, lassies, that we're here to get back to ye Abbey." Both squirrels dropped noiselessly down behind the oak, and they could talk observed. Tam whispered, to the captives, "Be quite still now. Don't make any sudden moves. Just tell me how many are guarding you." Rakkety moved her lips as she replied, "Only these two laying down not far from us. They're both asleep. The beast they call Gulu is over to the left of the fire. I think he's asleep also. There's a fox sitting at the edge of the fire. Keep an eye on that one. His name's Captain Shard. He looks like he's asleep, but you never can tell. He's a sly one, that's all." The ropes, which had been stretched about the oak trunk at necktie, suddenly fell slack. Tam and Doogie crept around to face Amrel and Brookley. Tam whipped through the otter maid's bonds with his small dagger. As Tam handed over his knife to Brookie, he instructed her carefully. "Free your friend from then move quietly around to the back of this tree and wait for us. Give your cloaks. We'll heed them for the two guards." The abbey maids did as they were bidden. They had to only wait for a brief moment before the two squirrel warriors returned. Doogie began retying the ropes that had been stretched around the tree. With Tam spoke reassuringly to liberated prisoners. "My friend is binding the guards to this tree. I hope you didn't mind us borrowing your cloaks. We've dressed them up to look like you two in case any beast wakes during the night. Now let's get away from here as quickly as silently as possible." Brooklyn suddenly halted at the sight of the sentry leaning up against the hornbeam, but Doogie urged her onward. "Do not be feared, lassie. He'll be no bother to ye." Neither the abbey maid had ever encountered a slain creature before. The otter maid crept gingerly past the dead ermine. "You mean you killed him? The guards?" Doogie raised his eyes skyward, if seeking patience. "Mom, the vermin, the phobies, you ken. Wouldn't ye sooner be back there roped to a tree?" Armel shook her head. "Please forgive our foolishness. We are more than grateful for you and your friends saved our lives." She placed a paw upon Tam's. "I'm sorry. We'll take the time to thank you properly back at the Abbey." "Oh, wait." Tam gazed into the most beautiful eyes he had ever seen. "What is it, miss?" "What can't wait? We've got to go fast." The squirrel maid shook her pretty head. "I must go back for the sword. That fox Shard took it from me. It's hidden under his cloak." Tam barred his path back to the camp, puzzled, and inquired, "Sword? What sword? What are you talking about, miss?" "Armel," she replied. "My name is Sister Armel. Who are you, sir? And where do you come from? Please answer me." Tam was frankly bewildered, but Sister Armel fascinated him. "My name's Rakkety Tam Ch, and he's Wild Doogie Plum. I'm here from the north of the border, but Doogie's a Highlander. Why?" Armel's eyes shone with joy. She seized Tam's paws. "The borderer who's to force for good. Tell me, why aren't you wearing a sword, Mr. McWhirl?" Tam was bewildered by her question. I had to give it up in exchange for something." "Why, sister? Is it important?" Armel pressed in her interrogation. "It's vital, sir. Would you say you lost your sword?" Dougie interpreted. "Aye, ma'am, you could say that, but we don't have time to hear and gossip and move yourself, Tam, before the vermin come after us." Normally Tam would have heeded his friend's warning, but something could tell neither explain nor understand the urging him to listen to the squirrel maid. "You go, Doogie. Take the otter maid with ye. I must hear our friend out. We'll catch up with you shortly." The Highlander shook his head as Tam's attitude. "Ah, hope you know what you're doing, mate. We'll await you near the path here on the left. My shield and here's on my left of my claymore. Good luck to you both." When the Highlander and the otter maid had gone, Tam turned to Armel, Doogie's right. "Sister, we shouldn't stay long here. Please tell me what this is all about." Realizing the urgency of the situation, the squirrel maid tried to explain. Briefly, in a dream, it was told by a long-dead warrior to take his sword and search for those who pursues the vermin lord, who his exact words were, "The borderer who's forced for good, and the warrior who sold him lost his sword. The white fox, Captain Shard, he stole the sword from me. Mr. McBurl, I think you are the warrior who can get it back." The border warrior's heart melted at the hope shining from the maid's soft brown eyes. He smiled. "You can call me Tam. I'll get the sword for you, sister, but stay out of the way when we get back to the vermin camp. Here, take a little dagger. You may need it." Armel took the sindhu, which fitted her paw perfectly. "Thank you, Tam. You may call me Armel." He winked boldly at her. Lucky me, I've lost a sister and gained a friend. Right, let's go to get a sword, Amel. Nothing had stirred in the camp since Tam and Amel left. The vermin slept around the bed of glowing embers and had once been a campfire. Gula Savage lay on one side, facing away from the white ashes, his mouth lolling open as he emitted hoarse, rasping snores. Shard sat bent almost double, his shoulders rising and falling beneath his cloak. Tam peered from behind the double-topped oak, assuring himself that no beast was alert. Amel crouched alongside the warrior and pointed out the white fox captain. He's the one. Look, I can see the sword. It's hanging from his shoulders by a cord. Abbot Humble had the sword wrapped in a soft cloth sheath. See the tip of it sticking out beneath the fox's cloak on the left side? Tam nodded. I can see it now. Well, listen, get up into this tree. We'll travel faster by branch top if they come after us. The squirrel maid began climbing into the lower browse. I was brought up in the abbey, so I might be very good at what you call branch hopping, Tam. Tam flattened himself upon the ground, drawing his dirk. Don't fret, you'll learn. I'll be with you. He slid forward carefully, feeling the heat of the glow upon his face, keeping his eyes on Shard's back, and warrior crawled up behind him. Reaching out, he touched the sword, testing it with a gentle tug. Then he froze. Shard moved in his sleep, mumbled incoherently as he pawed at his back. Tam figured the cord must still be holding the sword to the fox's shoulders. It was not in his nature to kill a sleeping beast, even one of Gula's burden. But with this in mind, he was only one course of action. Reversing his grip to the dirk, he took hold of it by the blade, and standing it straight, Tam brought the heavy bound handle crack down on his enemy's head. Shard had a thicker skull than the border scroll had reckoned with, and the fox captain stood up, letting out a howl of pain. Tam struck him again, harder. This time maneuvering worked, but not before an ermine woke, shouting, Guards, guards, attack! The ermine came dashing around the glowing fire, remembering toward the intruder, grappling to free the sickle sword from his wrist sash. Tam sprang into action, catching the fox as he fell backward, the squirrel leaving him bodily open to the ermine, sending them both crashing into the fire pit. Leaning forward, Tam slashed at the rear of the fox captain's cloak, ripping it wide and retaining the cord of Martin's sword. He grabbed it and dashed to the oak as an uproar broke out behind him. Gula was bawling, Yar! Cut him down! Get him! Bounding up into the oak branches, Tam rapped out orders to Armel, who was waiting wide open with fright. Jump! Go for the hornbeam! She hesitated for a moment, but then felt herself pulled into space as the warrior took her with him, guiding her encouragingly. This is the way, mate. Grab the big limb. Now swing yourself and drop down into that elm on the right. Good. Keep on now to that U. Fall across one of the lower branches. Now swing, hook, 2, 3, straight into the willow. That's the stuff, Ramel. You're learning fast. Elevated by her newfound agility and pleased with Tam's praise, the Redwall's infirmity sister went looping and hurtling through the leafy terraces. Tam continued guiding her. Now ran up the sycamore branch and bounced. Push yourself out and use this thin elm branch to throw yourself forward into the breach. Keep going. I'm right behind you. Don't stop. We'll soon be at the path. Tam allowed Armel to learn the natural rhythm before he glanced back at the howling crowd of vermin coming through the woodland. He looped the covered sword round his one shoulder, beckoning her to continue. Carry on. I'll be with you in a tick. There was 3 front runners among the vermin, 2 foxes and an ermine. Another fox was close behind them, rushing to catch up. Tam dropped from the breach, landing in the ground by an aspen. It was a slim, many-branched tree, and very flexible, its lower boughs almost sweeping the grass. He seized the end of a thick, whippy branch and pushed at it, running forward as it bent. The aspen limb was bowed round in an arc. Tam held it for a moment until the three front-runner women were almost upon him. Then he let go of the bow. It came back at the runners like a thunderbolt. Whoosh! Crack! Perplexed by force, the trio were knocked flat. Tam raced to them, grabbed one of the enemy's spears, and flung it at the fox who had been catching up. Unable to stop until the spear point met it halfway, the fox fell without a sound, never to rise. Doogie could hear the yells of the pursuing vermin standing in the path with Armel and Brookie. He called out, "Aha! The brawl! Over here, laddie!" The wild war cry of the border and Highlanders came back at him from the woodlands. "Ha ha! The brave! Here's McBurrow." Tam came hurtling through the branches and bound into the path. He quickly pulled the dirk from his friend's belt so that he was double-bladed and ready. "They're coming on fast, mate, but in small bunches. Armel, you and your friend get going at all speed for Redwall. Keep going and don't look back. Go on." The squirrelmate took a glance at the blood fire in Rakkety Tam's girl's eyes and decided it was not a time to stop and argue. Doogie began laughing wildly. "Aye, we've seen ye back at your abbey, lassies. Dinna fuss yourselves about us." Amarl seized Brookie's paw. "Do as they say." Both maids sped off northward up the path to the abbey. The first 6 vermin to reach the paw south, the 2 retreating figures in the early dawnlight, one of them a white captain named Zurich. He pointed at Irma and Brooklyn with a spear. "Stop them!" Tam and Doogie burst from the ditch, roaring, "Ha ha, the brave!" and threw themselves fiercely upon the vermin. Fighting like mad beasts, Tam took 2 ermine with a flying thrust with both of his dirks. Doogie belted a fox in the throat with a clenched paw and felling the ermine with the swinging of the claymore. Zurich was dashing back into the woodlands when Tam threw a dirk which pinned him into a willow. Doogie was encountering the fox's sword when he retrieved the dirk and called to him, "All right now, bucko, they're coming in force." The Highlander dispatched his opponent with a neat lunge as Tam reached his side. Over 20 more vermin came bursting out of the trees. Seeing 6 of their own lying slain, they hesitated fractionally, and that was all the squirrels required. Taking to their heels, the pair dashed off northward. Bullying bush and beast from his path, Gulu burst amid his warriors, bellowing, "Kill, kill, kill! Charge!" The vermin thundered onto the path after the 2 squirrels. Tam and Doogie sped on abreast, looking back fleetingly. Doogie glimpsed a mob of vermin racing madly to catch them up. He frowned. "How far to this Redwall Abbey, do you reckon?" Tam kept his eyes on the path ahead. "I don't know, mate. Just keep going. I can see Amel and her friend way up ahead." The small Highlander winced as an arrow zipped by his head. "Ouch! I hope it's as soon, 'cause those murderers mean business." "You're always complaining, Doogie Bloom. Save your breath and run." Doogie's paws were hitting the path like pistons. "Run! What do you think I'm doing? Dancing a jig?" Tam grabbed the front of his comrade's belt and speeded him up his pace. "There's the abbey. Don't start flagging now." He risked a backward glance at their pursuers. The vermin were gaining upon them. Gulu, who was not built for sustained a fast run, was shambling along at the rear. Skipper was watching from the southwest wall corner of Abbey, shouting frantically, "Go gate! The gate's open! Sound the alarm bells! Arm some able-bodied beasts and get them to the gates!" The Otter chieftain bowed down the wall steps, still calling orders as the Abbey twin bells boomed and clanged out in the bright early morning. "Burlap, Gullard with the gates. Dimple, tell Formal to get his crew and threshold fast." Boom, clang, boom, clang. The Matthias and the Methuselah bells rolled out from the brazen warnings throughout Redwall. Creatures poured in from the Abbey building, armed with the first thing that they came to paw: window poles, broom handles, kitchen pans, knives, and barrel stabs. Skipper, Cordell, and Burlap swung the front abbey gates open and dashed into the path, bellowing encouragement to the two abbey maids. "Armel, Brookie, hurry, please. Come on, mates. Not for to go. Run, run. Don't look back. There's two of 'em catching you up." As Skipper ran to meet them, both maids fell panting into his strong paws. Armel gasped urgently, "That's Dam and Doogie. They're my friends." Taryn and Ferdinand shot by her. The goshawk was screeching, and the young hare had his rapier drawn. "Yakar! Well, we come, Burrow, we come! Come on, don't dawdle, you chops! Let's get this bally gate shut, what?" They grabbed the squirrel's paws, pulling him along the final few paces and rushing them into the abbey grounds. Skipper had Armel and Brookie inside. Tam and Ferdinand helped him to slam the heavy oaken gates shut. Doogie and Burlap barred them hastily, thrusting the thick greased timbers into their holders. Willing paws hurried the two abbey maids off to the main building as Skipper unwound his sling. "Up to the walls, every beast!" The long patrol marching on double over to the western flatlands. When the brigadier sighted the abbey and heard the bells, even from far off, he suddenly made out the figures speeding along the path to Redwall. Throwing caution and order to the winds, he raced forward, and wielding his swagger stick like a drum major. "Long patrol, charge!" Swords and lances and spears flashed in the spring morning as the regiment broke ranks, thundering towards the abbey with their blood-curdling war cry ripping through the air. "Oolale!" Crowding the battlements, the abbey creatures set up a joyful cheer at the sight of 100 gallant hares charging to their aid. "Hooray for the Long Patrol! Give 'em blood and vinegar, Redwall!" The 40-year-old vermin who had been in pursuit of Tam and their escapers stopped running. They were strung out all along the path. Gulu the Savage was a reckless fighter, but he could not compete, was not a complete fool. With the rest of his force back at camp, the Wolverine knew he was heavily outnumbered. He sought out the White Fox captain. "All those with bows, tell them to release a volley, then follow us into the woodlands back to the camp." Urfurg swiftly gathered a dozen archers, positioning them at the edge of a ditch. They notched shafts to their bowstrings, sighted on the oncoming hares. Sergeant Onewheel, with his front runners, though unable to halt the headlong stampede, he ran up for all he was worth, with Crumshaw alongside him, both calling orders amid the war cries. "Archers to the front, ahead! Slow down and fall flat! Attention to the officers!" Most of the veterans heeded the commands, throwing themselves flat in the dewy grass. Some of the younger element, however, fired by the wild rush and eager of distinguishing themselves in battle, actually increased their speed, rushing headlong into the enemy. Foremost among these were the twin gallopers, Kersey and Dauncey. A volley of shafts shot from the vermin bows, humming and zipping like maddened hornets. Crumbshaw threw himself forward. An arrow pierced her shoulder as he hit Kersey, knocking her flat. Dauncey halted abruptly. For a few moments the young hare scout stood swaying, gapping at two shafts buried in his chest, then fell slowly into a kneeling position. Onewheel pushed himself into a somersault, reaching the stricken hare and holding him closely. Then the sergeant lowered him gently back to the ground. The young galloper stared up at Onewheel's battered face, questioning. "Oolale, sir! Charge to the bells! Oolale!" Darcy's head fell to one side as his eyes clouded over. The vermin archers were fitted more shafts to their strings. Looking about, Captain Urfrig saw that they were alone on the path, and that the hares were rising to renew their charge. The vermin captain shouted out urgent orders. Shoot quick and retreat back into the woodlands. He whirled about as a roar came from the battlements. Hollowell Braw, Rakkety Tam McBurl, and Wild Doogie Plum were climbing down the abbey walls as only two skillful squirrel warriors could. Doogie had his claymore between his teeth. Tam had his jaw clamped about the sword of Martin. The women broke and fled, but two warriors were hard on their paws.